many people didn't know Juneteenth as a holiday until very recently. And I think it's a reminder to us that it's really important to be sure that we share our history in a way that offers people an opportunity, one, to learn, and two, to celebrate. I think the story is fascinating. One, because we tell it as sort of a culmination of what happened in Galveston, Texas, but that was happening all along the way because the emancipation, it wasn't like today, social media, and the word gets out quickly.
Right.
Back then, it was possible for something as significant as the Emancipation Proclamation to happen, and many people not know the implications of that. So to begin to understand that the Union Army not only had to sort of wage war, battle after battle, but every place that they went, they then had an opportunity to deliver the news that slavery was over. And so I imagine that as challenging as the Civil War was, and battle after battle, and many of us know the significance of that war being the bloodiest and the one that took so many lives, they got to share this happy news that slaves were free. That happened over and over and over again, all of the places where they were winning battles. And Galveston is the culmination of that.
One of the things I just learned about it is that, Galveston had maybe 10,000 people. And then a Union Army of 6,000 people show up in this island. I've been to Galveston. I've taken the ferry. And they show up in this town. And I learned that 4,000 of those soldiers were Black.
Yes.
And so trying to wrap my mind around what it must have been like for the enslaved people in Galveston to learn not only that they were free, but to learn from other Black people who are now empowered to fight and have the authority to share this news. I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
This is a part of the story that goes unknown for many people, that slaves run off or slaves run toward the fighting and no one knows what happens because they don't necessarily return to their home. And what we're just beginning to learn is that many of them didn't run off to freedom, they ran off to fight.
Yeah.
And so to have them come back dressed, uniformed as soldiers, to expand their identities beyond being the slave or the runaway, and to come back as soldiers, taking full responsibility for the future of their country. That's powerful. Well, I think one of the messages of Juneteenth is how important it is to tell the story, and to tell that story of liberty. You and I have we just last week had Pentecost, and we know, for me, the connection was the power to tell the story. And the story there was the story of Jesus. And so I see them as connected, that our true freedom and liberty comes in our relationship with Jesus Christ. But no one can really understand the full breadth of it if we don't tell these stories. If we don't tell the story of Jesus, if we don't tell the story of Juneteenth, if we don't tell the story of all of those who have participated and fought for our freedom, then we don't fully understand our history. And so it's important today because for many of us, Juneteenth is recent. We probably don't know everything there is to know about it. And so it's important in this day and time to be sure that we share comprehensively that holiday. Is just important, no, more important, that we share the story of Jesus. And so I was just thinking that that rush of violent wind that really empowered us to tell the story allows us to tell the story of Jesus, tell the story of freedom. It empowers us in a way that doesn't make us afraid.
I love in the Old Testament, it seems like every time God does something, right, we have to stack some stones and remember, and especially the story of Exodus, this kind of foundational story of the scriptures of God setting people free.
Yeah.
And then we tell that story. That's, the Old Testament is just, let's tell that, remember that
Right.
story, remember that story, remember who you are, remember that God has set you free, remember your value. And as Christians, we have the opportunity to tell that story, but also all the ways that liberation has broken out.
Yeah.
Or even times when our ancestors have stood in the way of liberation, right. And to know that can happen still. And there were people who went to church on Sundays and then had slaves, abused slaves, participated in this awful work, and that was so ingrained in our history and in our nation. And so it's so important that we remember, I think. And I think, for a white person who didn't grow up at all knowing that much about Juneteenth, it's an opportunity to learn those stories, remember those stories, and remember that it's not just something that happened forever ago and it doesn't have implications today, but to think about the actual people who aren't that different from us, and what they went through is so powerful and so helpful as we think about how we walk and live in our world today.
Right. It's a wonderful thing about the Bible. It does make available to us stories that I'm not sure we would have otherwise. And so it reminds us how important having the story is. My ancestry really stops once my ancestors were here. I don't have the story of before the Atlantic. And so the Bible is a reminder that Israel had the story before Egypt. Daniel had the story before Nebuchadnezzar carried him off to Babylon. And so it's important for us to begin to consider the value of having a fuller story. Yeah. Now, I think that that's beginning. I think that for the first time, people are exploring, well, let's begin to understand what happened as people left the shores of Africa and came here. We won't fill every gap, but having a full, complete story like we have in the Bible. And some people will say, but it's not as complete as it could be. Sure. But it's more complete, probably, than a lot of things that we have. I think it gives us an appreciation in this day and time, really the importance of telling the story. Even it's the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Because I think that it's really important. And I think that it also helps us to think about, one of my friends talks about evangelical hermeneutics, this idea that a slave was human enough to go to heaven, but on earth they could only expect oppression and slavery. To really untell those stories. Right. And to really begin to help people, not to shift blame, but to really begin to think about, how does healing come as we shift that story? Yeah. And so I think it's really important for people to hear, telling the story is not designed to blame. It's a design to heal. And that's what we're promoting. And that's what the gospel of Jesus Christ promotes, healing. Starting on June 15th, we have activities at the History Center, at the Art Center. There's a quilting demonstration. There are walking tours. There's a movie on Juneteenth at the Uptown. There's activities for children. And we have as an opportunity as two congregations on that Sunday to incorporate the theme of We've Come This Far by Faith into our worship services. And I am challenging St. Paul's and the Baptist Church to go beyond the walls of our congregation and invite our community into our services so that they can begin to hear these stories and begin to celebrate with us on that day.